For our top news, there's been a breakthrough in separating plastic waste. Machines apparently can now distinguish 12 different kinds of plastic. Now, in technology, John Deere's self-driving tractor stirs debate on AI in farming. In the climate, it's costing us more to ignore climate change than to actually step up and address the problem. And on the material stuff, apparently 3D semiconductor particles offer 2D properties. In space, the Webb telescope fully deploys sunshield in mission milestone. Now, in biology, scientists have trained goldfish to drive a fish-operated vehicle on land. I wonder why. And humans, can you think yourself young? And in health, doctors, and I think we've seen a lot about that recently, doctors complete the first successful pig-to-human kidney transplant. And they've also done a heart one as well, I think. So that's what we'll discuss today. And Richard, what's this in our top story? That machine can now distinguish 12 different types of plastic.
Now, people think that plastic is all one thing, but there are a lot of different plastics, many materials, many polymers, different chemical compounds with additives like pigments and fibers. And so it's actually very difficult to tell one piece of plastic from another, one kind of plastic from another. And researchers, it looks like they were Danish researchers from Aarhus University. Is that a Danish college?
Aarhus.
No, that's a big town in Denmark.
Well, but there is a university there, and it's called Aarhus University. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Anyway, the Danes come to our rescue once again. And this time they've developed a new camera technology that can tell the difference between 12 different types of plastic. Between them, those 12 different types of plastics are more than 95% of all the plastic waste. And now they have a camera that can tell them apart. It's basically all of the household plastics and some of the high performance plastics. And so this technology makes it possible to separate plastics into a pure chemical composition than is even possible today. And this is going to open up new opportunities to actually recycle plastics. You know, we have a lot of recycled plastic bins, but most of the plastics, even from them, goes into solid waste. It's been tested in a pilot production, and the first real facility is going to go online this spring. So that's pretty soon. And what they use is what they call a hyperspectral camera. So it's a camera that works over a wide spectrum. A lot of it is in the infrared area, and they combine this with an AI system, and it's able to identify the kind of plastic. And the way you would use it in plastic separation is you have a plastic conveyor bringing all the plastic in. Here's an example of what you're going to see. Look at that collection of smashed plastic bottles, and that's going to have different kinds of plastic in it. And you can put the stuff on a conveyor belt they can figure, the camera and the AI can figure out what kind of plastic it is, and then sort it into the right bin, if you will. And this is important for the plastic to actually be recycled. It has to be pretty pure. It has to be 96% or higher pure with that plastic. Otherwise, the recycling doesn't work. And the thing that has limited in the world the recycling of the plastic is the separation of all the different kind of plastics that are in the trash. And this solves that problem. The biggest problem in the way of plastic recycling in the world. That's why I put it as the top story, because it's a top kind of issue. And using this technology, we now will be able to take a big step on the way of turning the plastic trash business into mining plastic. The plastic that can be separated is now actually got economic value, and I bet we can go a long way towards generating the plastic that we need in the world by sorting and reusing the plastic trash that now fills our landfills and the ocean. So I think that is a very big deal.
Any thoughts?
I think that there must be a limit. If it's small pieces, broken off piece of plastic, it might be a little harder to get it into a bin.
Oh, I'm sure you're right. It's not going to do anything about microplastics, for example. And, you know, they talk about microplastics in the multiple trillions of pieces in the ocean.
And I did look at the article, but I didn't see anything about how much this is going to cost to do it. And I just hope that it's not going to be so expensive that commercial people, like commercial recyclers, like the one we have in Cincinnati, for example, that they will not invest in it, because, you know, that's going to mean an awful lot.
Right. If you look at the cost elements, it's basically a camera hooked up to a computer. That's not very expensive. And then you still have to have the robotic arms that are controlled by the cameras. And those actually are fairly common technologies now. They've been using varieties of them to build cars for the last decade, for example. So that all is known technology.
Actually, years ago, I worked at UPS R&D, and they read address on a package, and they had little arms that would push the package into different bins. So it's old technology.
Right, right. So it's a good point, Suzanne. This one, I think, is not going to, it doesn't have to be expensive. The camera is fairly special. Part of the story is actually, as often you read about with these stories, there's a group of grad students in some university that are inventing new things. And the key development here was this different high frequency bandwidth camera that is used.
And then the other thing that's important is whether there's actually a buyer for the specific types of plastic that there are.
It depends on the cost. If you can make it cheaper than they can get it from oil and refine it from oil, because it has to be cheaper to use plastic that you melt down than to take oil and then refine it and break it into the plastic components and use that as your starting material. It has to be. You know, just less energy would be involved.
Well, Richard, what's this about John Deere having a self-driving tractor? stirring debate on AI and farming. Tell us about it.
Well, John Deere has been around in automating farming for a while. They really got in the business in 1837. That's 1837 when they they invented and commercialized the steel plow. So they've been in farming for a while. And last week, they unveiled a machine that they say could be just as transformative as the metal plow was to agriculture almost 200 years ago. And this is their new 8R tractor, and it uses 6 stereo cameras, that's 6 pairs of stereo cameras, and advanced AI to look at its environment and navigate. It can find its way to a field. You have to give it a route, though. It can't figure out how to get to its field on its own. You have to tell it where to go. And then it can either plow or sow seeds without instructions, avoiding obstacles, turning, doing all those things you do in a plow. And a farmer can give the tractor new orders by a smartphone app. And I guess farmers now all have smartphones and know how to use them. Is that right? We need somebody. Andrew, tell us about farmers and smartphones. They can use them anyway. Okay.
I've been out of the farming business for about 20 years and it's moved on quite a bit since then.
Okay.
But like you say, most tractors nowadays look like the cockpit of a 747 with
Yes.
all these different screens and other things. So I wouldn't be surprised. But one of the interesting things about this is John Deere is wanting to sell this software on a subscription basis. So buyers of the tractors would have to pay a monthly or yearly fee to keep the machine running. And that's a kind of a new trend that's even the car companies are doing this now, that you have to buy a subscription to keep your car software up to date and operational.
And part of what John Deere is doing to make this subscription service of interest is the tractor has sensors that go down to the dirt, and then they're analyzing in every time they turn around, every time they move, they're analyzing the dirt that's there and they're sending the data up, and John Deere is accumulating their digital map of all the dirt in North America. And it turns out, I guess, knowing about your dirt is a useful thing for the farmer.
Mhm.
And like Andrew is saying, of course, now part of the beauty of this kind of internet business is we can get money now and money later. You know, you get money for the tractor and then money for the ongoing service. And when I was a marketing consultant, one of the most attractive things I saw for my customers were those deals that's money now and money later. So, you know, companies like that stuff. They haven't said how much it is going to cost. Right now, their current expensive models can cost $800,000 for a tractor. I'm sure that's one like Andrew saw with all the bells and whistles and computer screens, and it would even smile at you when you got in, I guess, as long as you were properly dressed. Anyway, the part of why this is easier than AI cars is it turns out driving around an empty field is a lot less challenging than navigating a busy city intersection. So it's easier technically. It's still like other cars that just use cameras. I think this may be a problem with Teslas. Norman can comment on that. Is they have difficulty seeing in extreme weather conditions like snow or rain. So don't plow your field when it's snowing.
Any thoughts?
I was wondering about the loss of jobs. I know when I was a kid, farming is pretty labor intensive. But I suppose it's one of those things that you just have to get some money into retraining and go with it. You can't stop the technology.
And now there's lots of places where they're having trouble finding enough workers for farms.
I remember,
Right.
Richard, you gave a
Because of the law.
discussion on the automatic milking and feeding in Canada.
Yes. And it's part of the farm automation. Now, John Deere, talk about loss of jobs. John Deere is saying, ultimately, we may not even need farmers. Dispatching autonomous tractors to manage large-scale robotic farms. So they are envisioning farming without the farmer. So I think that might be a loss of jobs.
Right now, my sister is co-owner of a farm in Argentina. And I know they take samples over the field. And then based on those samples, they fly with a plane and they spray the field with whatever they need, nutrients they need for the plants.
It's a very it's becoming a lot more of a high-tech area, at least in one extreme. I still remember the small farms in India that were still used. The family had the farm and there would be 20 members of the family, almost all women, out planting and harvesting rice, and the fields still might not be plowed by a tractor. They might be plowed by a bullock pulling a plow. So there's still a lot of these small farmers and small independent farmers around the world. And what I wonder about is them. And if we have a food revolution, like they're saying is necessary for us to make it through the next 20 years, what happens to all of these small farmers?
Well, in North America, farming isn't a mom and pop operation anymore. It's all big business and big money.
Yes.
And you can't just be a farmer. You can be a hobby farmer if you've got a real job to subsidize it. But
Yes.
you can't make money as a small farmer anymore.
Yes, 20 years ago, I went back to Oklahoma, in an area where my family was before I was a kid, even in West Oklahoma, and it's a land, kind of with gentle rolling hills. And in the old days, it was many farms and houses and fields. When I went back there, you couldn't find any of the houses or any of the fields or any of the fences. They were all torn out, so they would have this big swath of land to plant wheat on. And when it was harvest time, then the combines that work their way from Texas to Canada every season, there would be a row of 10 combines going over the field harvesting the wheat. But for the rest of the year, you wouldn't see anybody in the field.
Well,
So-
Richard, if we want to move on to climate change, who is this who's decided it's costing us more to ignore climate change than to actually step up and address it?
Well, they're starting to accumulate some numbers that are, I think, pretty convincing. The top 10 weather catastrophes last year, 2021, cost 170 billion in terms of damages that had to be repaired, fixing things after Hurricane Ida goes by, for example. When you look at the whole damage from this kind of extreme weather, I just saw a number this morning saying the whole damage last year was $280 billion fixing problems that happen from extreme weather. If you figure the next 10 years are not going to increase and add that up, then in the next decade, that'll be almost $3 trillion that we're spending on just fixing disasters. And the question is, what can we do in the world if we spent that kind of money on mediating these disasters? By the way, last year's weather disasters killed more than 1,000 people, and I guess they were small. They only displaced 1.3 million people. So, these costs are costs that are going to keep continuing as long as we keep feeding the disruption of the climate. And it turns out these costs we're going to have to pay anyway, because we're going to have to fix those problems in our society. And maybe what we actually have to do is invest in whatever it takes to mitigate the problems, and don't spend all our money fixing stuff.
The problem here is that climate change is a reality and it's inevitable. It cannot be prevented with any amount of money or any amount of regulation. So instead of trying to prevent climate change, we need to adapt to climate change and recognize it for what it is.
Or can't we do things to make the changes less bad?
But one of the problems, they say that the statistics say that the weather's no worse than it was 100 years ago. And that a lot of this extra cost is because of increased building in vulnerable areas and increased restoration costs and inflation and all these other things. So, and also it's because people more and more expect the government to pick up the pieces when
but also part of the
happen.
problem we had last year, like the heat domes and stuff that happened in Western Canada. Those were weather events that had never happened before that impacted I think hundreds of thousands of people over a broad part of the country. And so it's not just that there are more houses in floodplains, but the weather events are more extreme. And part of that extreme is things like windstorms carry more energy, and the energy knocks things down.
Well, you can pretty much find facts to support whatever politics you'd like, but the daily cost is a mouthpiece of the Democratic Party. So you got to figure they're supporting the Democratic line.
Or that the Democratic Party cares about the future of the planet, and the Daily Cost thinks it's a good idea. This data about the cost of this stuff, by the way, is from various sources. The article I gave you was from the Daily Cost, because they're the ones that reported it earlier than the mainstream media does. And the mainstream media doesn't like running these stories for some reason. I don't know why.
The other thing is that they have shown that a lot of these phenomena used to happen maybe once every few hundred years, 500 years. And a lot of these are not common. There's a lot of time interval between them happen except now. Except now. This is scientifically proven.
They say, like, for example, I read in the mainstream press, not Daily Kos, that they had said the last 7 years are the hottest 7 years in the modern history of the planet. And again, when it's hotter, there is more energy into the atmospheric system, and the energy does stuff when it is kind of inflicted upon our poor little planet.
I think the cost, as this gets worse and worse, the waters, they rise because of rising temperatures. It's going to destroy a lot of coastal areas in the United States, like the East Coast and parts of California. That's going to cost a lot of money.
And, you know, we still have a shelf that is looks like it is falling apart in Antarctica, and they hadn't expected that. That's not built in any of the models, and they're talking about an ocean rise of, I don't remember what the numbers are, 20 feet, 28 feet, something like that, fairly substantial. And I think that will end up causing more trouble in the coastal areas around the world than all the hurricanes put together. Anyway, we have trouble, and the problem with just adapting to the trouble without trying to ameliorate it is we have to adapt to a moving target. And if we can do things to first limit the CO2, the junk we're putting in the air, and then start to take it out of the air, we have a chance to, we're not going to stop it, but maybe we can have a softer landing. I used to think we could stop it, and now my highest objective is a soft landing.
Well, Richard, if we want to move on to materials, what's this about three-dimensional semiconductor particles with two-dimensional properties?
Well, again, you guys know about me, and this is stuff that I am interested in. And it turns out when it comes to creating the next generation of electronics, what they know already is two-dimensional semiconductors will have a big edge. They're faster, more powerful, and more efficient, and they're tiny. It also turns out that so far they are incredibly difficult to fabricate. So they have all this wonderful power, except that we can't make them. So they're not very useful because of that. So they have figured out something interesting about three-dimensional particles, and this was figured out using modern real high power magnification tools and things like this. So they could only figure it out with the latest generation of scientific tools. And they found out that three-dimensional semiconductors, then if you make them in ways where the surfaces are varied, so you have these facets and the edges come together of these facets, at the points where the facets, the edges come together, they have properties that you only have seen before in 2D material. And so what happens when you put these edges together is each of the surfaces has a different energy level. And when they join together in an edge, the energy levels mismatch. And that mismatch gives you an energy transition, and these energy transitions are really what bring about the semiconductor effects and all the magic in electronics. And to start with, they never imagined that they were going to find something like this. They just found it because they were, scientists get nosy and they look around, and they were looking at the highest resolution imaging they have, and they were starting to see it. Now, this particular capability that they found, they believe will be really useful in the production of hydrogen, because the particular way they found it was they were looking at a semiconductor bismuth vanadinate, and this material can absorb light and then use that energy to oxidize water molecules, which generates hydrogen and oxygen. So this is not exactly like a catalyst, but it kind of works like a catalyst, and it's using the energy of the sun then to break water apart into hydrogen and oxygen, and apparently can do it and do it at high efficiency. And it also, what it means is it gives these technologists another avenue to look for ways to be able to generate other electronic properties that we can find only in 2D materials presently, by examining more of these kinds of junctions of different semiconductor materials. And it may give us power to kind of extend the life of 3D semiconductors for as long as it takes us to make 2D semiconductors. And again, these kind of issues are issues because it is these kind of developments in microelectronics that has really pushed technology forward now for the last 60 years.
Any thoughts? Well, maybe not a lot of thoughts then. Why don't we move on to space?
Okay, we don't have enough
And tell us
fascination
about
with
the
the
telescope.
facets. Okay.
But the Webb telescope that's fully deployed at Sunshield.
Well, it's more than the sun shield. Since this article has come out, it's deployed a bunch of things. And let me show you a film about this. This is about a little more than a minute and a half. And let me turn it on. And this is the deployment. And you can see it opening up. And it's putting out the sun shield now. Or getting ready to. And still getting ready. There comes the sun shield. And now it's making tension. And now comes a motor support structure. And now the telescope is finishing deploying, swinging into place. And then we had to have another orbital burn. And there it is, getting ready to go on its way. And now it's still it still has another few weeks before it gets into its space designation, which is Lagrange point, about 1 million miles away from Earth, where it can go into a stable orbit. And they say it has another about 5 months of setup before they can turn it on. And it's got, in this period, it's got to do things like align the telescope's optics and calibrate all its science instruments and get it ready to go. This is a pretty amazing job. I think this is the first time anyone has tried to put a telescope this large into space, and it was a challenging deployment because the telescope is, as you can see, a lot bigger than the launch compartment. So they had to figure out how not only to make this wonderful telescope, but how they could fold it up into a package like we saw that could just unfold, deploy itself. It's gone through, I think, actually several hundred operations already, and done it, if not flawlessly, well enough where everything is okay. And again, all we're going to get from this is an infrared telescope that can look back and see stars and galaxies that were forming 13.5 billion years ago. That's only about 1 billion years after we think the Big Bang. And it's also going to let us look at distant planets to determine their origin and evolution and habitability. They think it might also help us to detect life on other planets by detecting, I guess, all the crap they put in their atmosphere, since we do that. So it's on its way,
Any thoughts?
folks.
I just wonder if when it went into space, well, they worried about all the space debris that it could have destroyed it.
It's past the space debris now.
Good.
So that's all in near Earth orbit.
Okay.
Well then,
No,
Richard,
this-
sorry.
This thing orbits around the sun. It doesn't orbit around the Earth.
Right.
It's in the same orbit as the Earth at one of these Lagrange points.
Right.
So Richard, in our story, how would you like to train goldfish to drive a vehicle on land? What is it?
Well, there are a lot of questions about this that I have, but the author who wrote about it says his favorite story he wrote 2 years ago was about a research study that taught rats to drive. And actually, I think we reported on this story here, and what they were able to find is that once you trained rats to drive, it made them happy. And so the story was really about how do you make your rats happy, not how do you get them to drive to the supermarket. And so this is another story about lab animals behind the wheel, but this time they weren't even mammals, they were goldfish. And the goldfish learned to drive what they call a fish operated vehicle, or FOV, okay, in terrestrial environments. And what they were actually trying to figure out, and I don't know why they were trying to figure this out, was how fish reacted in unfamiliar environments. And what could be more unfamiliar for a fish than driving a car over land? So I think if they wanted to create a special, unique environment for fish, they did it. And so what they did, the technology behind it, is they had a fish tank, and they had a downward looking camera that would track the fish's position in the tank. And if the fish was near one of the tank walls and facing out, then the control algorithm would move the FOV in that direction. They also had a LiDAR sensor that would override the fish control algorithm if the fish comes too close to a wall. So it had a way to prevent the fish tank from running into a wall. And I guess that's good because you don't want to break the fish tank on the wall. And they had 6 fish taking part in that experiment, and they taught them to drive in 30-minute sessions 3 times a week, basically every 2 days. And to start with, the fish were giving a reward if they navigated to a target, which was a pink corrugated board in the center of the enclosure to start with. And they found out first that the fish learned to drive the FOV. And second, over time, they became better drivers. And better drivers meant more frequently did they accomplish the task, and the time it took to do the task was less. So you could see the improvement of the fish in these driving skills. Then they wanted to make sure that the fish weren't just memorizing a pattern. So they started moving starting positions around and targets around and stuff like that. And they found the fish were fine at learning the new things. And in fact, the fish were able to approach the target from a variety of different angles. And they say that suggests that the fish have some internal mental representation of the world around them. So maybe this is our first glimpse into fish awareness. And so they trained the fish to be able to drive their FOV, and you give them more practice and the fish improved at it. I don't know what they're going to get the fish to do next, but this is more than I expected to ever hear about fish.
Any thoughts?
One of the things that's kind of suspect about this is the author is an automotive journalist, so he looks for things that have kind of a car context. But the way they had this set up was when the fish moved towards one wall of the tank moved in that direction. Now the fish can see out the sides of the tank, and it could see the target. So if it was attracted to the target and moved in that direction, the tank would follow. So really the fish wasn't driving the tank. The fish was attracted to the target and moved in that direction, and the tank followed the fish. And I think those rats that were driving the cars in the early article, they were teenage rats, and that's why they enjoyed it so much.
Okay, maybe these were teenage goldfish.
Do you have any
Yeah.
idea whether the goldfish were happy?
No, they didn't cover that, and I'm not sure how you measure the happiness of the goldfish. I was wondering with the rats how you measured that happiness of the rats, and they had something that sounded convincing. I don't remember what it was. How would you measure the happiness of your goldfish? Anyone? Come on, we got all these smart people here. And you can't even
You
tell
can
if your
tell by,
goldfish is smiling.
well, that's the thing. They smile if they're happy. But what they need to do is put the mother-in-law of the goldfish behind the goldfish and see if he responds to back seat driving or back fish driving.
Or if the goldfish tried to get away even harder.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I
So
think how we can change things, Richard. Can you indeed think yourself young?
well, I've believed for a long time in the power of, keeping the mind active and stuff like that. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing these sessions. But research actually shows that having a positive attitude to aging can lead to a longer, healthier life, while negative beliefs can be hugely detrimental. And this is research that has been going on really for 50 years. And, we have episodic cases they talk about here. For the last decade, there's a woman, Patty Jones, that's been wowing audiences with her salsa dancing. She is one of the world's leading acrobatic salsa dancers, according to Guinness World Records, but she also happens to be in her mid 80s. And she was a dancer when she was young. She had 4 children and got into retirement and started dancing again. And she says she doesn't talk about her age because she doesn't feel 80 or active. And according to research that now has been done over the last 50 years, it would be good for us all to have the same attitude. What they have found is that people who see the aging as a potential process for personal growth tend to have much better health in their 70s, 80s, and 90s than people who associate aging with helplessness and decline. And what is interesting is they have been able to see this not only in things like lifespan measurements, but also they have been able to see it down into the cellular level. And so here are a couple of experiments that they write about in the article that showed part of it. An early experiment was done in 1979 with a group of 70 and 80-year-olds. And first they had them complete cognitive and physical tests. And then they took them on a week-long retreat to a nearby monastery. And the monastery had been decorated in the style of the late 1950s. And the researchers asked the participants to live as if it were 1959. And they stayed in this for a week, and they had twice daily discussion sessions in which the participants had to talk about political and sporting events of 1959 as if they were currently in progress. So that's the experimental group. Then they had a control group that were in a second retreat a week later with a new set of participants. It was in the same place with the same decor and diet and social contact. And the participants were asked to reminisce about the past, but not to overtly act as if they were reliving the period. And what they found was after this was over, 63% of the test group had a cognitive gain, whereas only 44% of the control group did. So there was a measurable increase in cognitive gain. Also, among the test group, their joints became more flexible and their hands more mobile, and there was less inflammation from arthritis. So this is after a week of living like it was 20 years ago and doing whatever that happened to the brain and metabolism. They could see differences there. Then there's another study where they started with a larger group of people. The average of them was 63 years old. They had them do a survey to give their views on aging. And for example, they were asked to rate their agreement of the question, as you get older, you are less useful. And astonishingly, they found that the average person with a more positive attitude lived for more than 22 years after the study was done, while the average person with a poor attitude lived just 15 years. That's a pretty substantial difference. They say, if we found a virus now that reduced the average survival age of people who had it by 7 years, they would think this would be a big problem in the world and they might be doing something about it. But this goes on and they really haven't noticed it. And they have done many studies that have reinforced the idea of this link between people's expectation and their physical age. And of course, they're trying to figure out what's going on. They say their best idea is that people who have this negative age stereotype tend to have higher systolic blood pressure in response to challenges than those with the positive stereotype. And they say this makes sense because if you believe that you are frail and helpless, small difficulties will start to feel more threatening, increasing the body's stress responses and the cortisol hormone and body inflammation, all of which are problems for old people. They even saw a difference in the telomeres, where the people with a negative attitude had more telomere damage than the people with a positive attitude. So it seems to me like this story says that we need to believe that this time in our life really is a time for growth and learning and continued expression. If we think we're just on a downhill slope to death and destruction, then that attitude is going to speed up the process. So,
any thoughts?
I
You know,
think
it reminded me of a book that I read recently and reported on it in another meeting, The Travels with Epicurus by Daniel Keene. And it really relates to this. He says that we should become indifferent to old age. In fact, old age is the pinnacle of our life. We have a lot of accumulated knowledge. We know a lot of stuff, even though people may not want to hear about it. And we've lost some passions that distracted us. And just as we should, it's the pleasure of the journey now, not the destination. And we need companionship, friends. It all relates to this article. I thought that was very interesting.
yes, and I think that's right, that there's a lot of research that's going on that is, I think, congruent with this article.
There's another factor, I think, very important factor. We just came from freezing, raining Cincinnati, Ohio. We come down here to this beautiful sun and walking around, getting more exercise. I think that's a big factor. So it affects our emotional well-being.
Right, I'm sure you're right. Now, they said in the study where they concluded that 7-year difference, they tried to normalize the data and correct for environmental factors and pre-existing health factors and do as much of that normalization of the data. And after they did their best to make it go away, there still was this enormous difference.
So Johannes, why are you going back to Cincinnati?
That's right. That's the right question. And it's January and February. I'm not sure that's the garden months.
I have to go back and be punished so I can enjoy when I come back here.
We'll be back.
Okay, that's good. I hope so.
Any other thoughts?
Anyone who would be interested in seeing Patty Jones, if you Google Patty Jones, Britain's Got Talent, there's a terrific video of her performance, and it really is remarkable for someone 80 years old.
Okay, I will do that. Thank you. And to me, comments like that, by the way, impress me so much with, the interest you are showing in these articles to Google Patty Jones and look at her video. Good work, Andrew.
Now, Richard, does our last topic of today say that perhaps you don't have to have a nice outlook? Instead, you can have pigs transplant your organs as they fall apart.
That's right. You can have pig parts instead of a good outlook. Maybe you can have a good outlook towards your pig parts, and you could do both of them together. So for the first time, doctors at NYU Long on the Hearth in New York City have transplanted a pig organ into a human being. They have done stuff with pig heart parts like valves, but not the whole pig heart. And there are more than 100,000 people in the US that are currently on the kidney transplant list. And the average time for a kidney is 3 to 5 years. And there are 17 deaths every day of people who are waiting for a kidney. So this is a big deal. The thing that had prevented these kind of transplants before is the human immune system rejecting the part from the pig. But what they have done is they've used our amazing biotechnology capabilities that we have now and change the genetic structure of these pigs and to alter them so the tissue is not rejected by the human beings. And that was a development we reported on about a year ago. And now they're taking the products from that and doing successful, the first successful transplant of an organ from a pig to a human being. And this is real significant for this 100,000 people waiting for a kidney, because these end-stage kidney failure patients now can have more hope. And they say procedures like this will become available within the next few years. So maybe if the human parts run out, we can get spares from the pigs. I don't know what they do with the rest of the pigs. I hope they make bacon out of it or something. Well, I guess if you're just taking one kidney, the pig can still live, right? Anyway. Any comments on our pig friends?
Did they also do a heart transplant using the same kind of mechanism? I thought I'd heard about that.
Okay, maybe I don't recall specifically, and they did say in the article this was the first organ transplant from pigs to humans, so they kind of implied otherwise. I know that that's a thing that they're working on.
They have done a heart transplant as
Okay,
well as a kidney transplant.
okay,
And Fred's right. I think this was an article that Richard had presented before, because they put the heart in a person who was brain dead. And
okay,
and in the same way that this kidney
Okay.
was put in a person who was brain dead, and kind of gifted their body to science. So
Okay.
same idea. Maybe
okay.
this, whether it was the same guy or not, I don't know. But
I don't think so. Do you think they'll be able to transplant a pig brain into an anti-vaxxer?
it's hard to say.
Anyway, I'm just looking for some hope here.
Yeah.
We think that there's a natural evolution and anti-vaxxers are a part of it.
Okay, okay. Well, do you think a pig brain would be an upgrade?
Hard to say. There's probably a lot of pigs who are anti-vaxxers as well. So,
I don't know. I don't know.
You wonder if this works in the Islamic countries. Would it?
Right,
would
that's a question, certainly. Are you gonna, I think that they're in the Jewish folks have figured out some way to say, while it's not good to have to eat pigs, it's okay to have heart valves from pigs because of some particular exclusion. What I know is some of these folks are wonderful about twisting logic when it's
But
used to their favor.
but I would be amazed if in Islamic countries they didn't have strong resistance to this.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also would expect it, but what are you going to do if your son is going to die because of kidney failure? That could bring up a serious kind of issue that you have to deal with.
And the Jehovah's face this all the time, eh?
Anyway, the technology sometimes brings these moral issues to the fore.
Yeah. So Richard, thanks a lot for everything. And thanks to everybody for participating. And we'll see you again next week. Bye for now.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Bye
Yeah.
bye.